Persona 3 intertwines its story with gameplay so well and to such a meaningful extent that I would consider it to be one of the most impactful JRPGs of the modern era. One that tells a story so beautiful it's almost impossible not to shed tears over. With that said, how do you remake that story? Persona 3 Reload, on paper, remakes the original Persona 3 FES from start to finish, including the often criticised answer for modern day hardware. However, not only does it leave out more than it includes, but I believe that it tends to overwrite the original game in many different ways that I would consider to be harmful to the experience overall. The UI, its gameplay mechanics, and the cinematic direction for cutscenes are three of the most egregious examples of this. Though, it does not mean that this game in its entirety is terrible or unplayable. In fact, I think that it improves upon different aspects of Persona 3 more than it does overriding it. While it's regarded as a competent and very capable remake of Persona 3, some in the community regard it as nothing but a waste of time. And I find that to be incredibly frustrating and deeply disrespectful to the developers that put hard and seriously passionate effort into this project. Persona 3 Reload itself functions perfectly normally to how any other Persona game does. You go to school during the day, make friends, study, play games, then after that, you moonlight as a sort of hero with powers that represent the themes and narrative in a way that's unique to each character. The experience overall is reflective of the greater themes at play, and that's really it. There isn't much to say about Persona 3 Reload other than it achieves what it set out to do. It is a really good game. If you were using this video as a deciding factor on whether or not you should buy it, then go do so. The worst part about it is that it tends to overwrite the original Persona 3 in ways that I think are hurtful to the experience overall. First and foremost, it is far easier than almost any other version of Persona 3, to the point where I didn't find much of the game to be challenging at all. I'd only restarted a boss twice. Once on the Hermit, and then the other time on Strength and Fortune. I felt that Nyx was a complete pushover. Spamming Yukari's party-wide insta-heal with little to no downside proved to be an underwhelming end to a boss that I thought would be quite difficult, but I don't think I even needed to do that to beat it. Even before those characteristics changes though, I'll get into them later, I felt the reason for it was because I was way over-leveled, which ultimately is my fault. Monad doors are incredibly brain-dead easy ways to over-level yourself very quickly. And I think that's its intended purpose, but I feel that if that was the case, then I'm not sure what the need is to replace Monad depths with these doors. The depths in previous titles were used as an easy way to grind to higher levels, which is fine here, as it's only made available to you later, where most of the game is already completed. But I don't know why they decided to change that to make it available incredibly early. Instead of being a positive change, it was one that, again, overwrites Persona 3's mechanics in favour of creating something entirely new. The UI and style is updated with a flair resembling its technical predecessor Persona 5, prioritising the artistic and colourful screens that look beautiful and hold symbolism fitting of Persona 3 itself, but again overwrites the originals in a way that are detrimental to the overall feel of Persona 3, with this very 2000s aesthetic that's present almost everywhere throughout the originals and even portable. The battles are probably the most egregious example of that, because with all its combined changes, it makes the overall experience feel like a fight scene from an anime, with all the cool poses, the shots of the characters all together, all with their unique all-out attack flourishes, taken directly from Persona 5 itself. The reason this isn't a positive in my opinion is because it betrays what Persona 3 was originally conveying to you. Battles weren't a fun exercise in beating the shit out of some piss cancer random, it was a painful necessity that took a toll on the party members all throughout the game, and even after the story ended. But even before all of that, I think the worst aspect of this game is probably the new cutscenes. Persona 3 has some of the most gorgeous cutscenes in the series, with a level of symbolism that set a precedent for the series' next 10 years. In Reload, they are neutered and watered down into some of the most bland and sometimes very cringy cinematic direction that takes all the artistry and beauty out of most scenes. The best example I can provide is the opening scene from the very start of the game. We open on the moon, a recurring symbol throughout Persona 3 meant to represent death. Eerie noises throughout the entire piece are meant to show that while things may seem normal, with people going about their daily lives, talking, eating, and having conversations with each other, something is deeply wrong about the world we're viewing. Flashes of people and places interrupt the view we're looking at. almost as if it's confronting us with something outside of our perception. Then it hits you. While the world plays around us, someone's life is about to end. The opening of Persona 3 intends to paint a very vivid and horrifying picture of what the next 100 or so hours are about, and it does that without saying a word. And that is the world you are introduced to in the original Persona 3. This game is about death and the fear of dying. Death affects every character in the game one way or another, and coming to terms with it in whichever way it manifests, whether it be death of a career, a loved one, or a relationship, is what the game is about. That's what Yukari is portraying here. Despite deep down wanting to be taken out, she can't do it, as if there's something holding her back. What's holding her back, what she's living for, is in essence the point of the entire game. When remade for a modern audience, I don't know why, but the developers of the game didn't seem to be able to communicate that without dialogue, which leads to a delivery like this.
And then, the trigger. Come on. There's no way I can't!
As a side note, the voice actors do a brilliant job at voicing each and every character, and for me, adequately filled the hole that was left by the original cast not returning. This delivery is not the fault of the actor. Heather Gonzalez does an amazing job voicing Yukari in every other instance, but unfortunately, I think the context and even the line itself just make the scene come off really cringy and misses the point of the original. This is just one of many examples. Some are more egregious, some less, but all, I feel, are deeply damaging to Persona 3's overall message. Shinjiro's death changes what the characters are doing and the cinematography to be entirely different compared to how it plays out in the original, and I've never liked that. In the original, Shinjiro gets shot twice, then gets up, walks off, and falls over dead. The streetlights burning lines into his vision, his whole world blurring before him. I felt like that represented who he was really well. Shinjiro, throughout the entirety of Persona 3, up until this point, is standoffish and a little stoic. He's an older member of SEES with a tragic past he can't seem to forgive himself for, which is why every time Akihiko asks him to come back, he refuses, preferring to be left alone. When he joins, it's only really to receive retribution, as another party member, Ken, had planned to kill him, and Shinji knew about it. In Reload, his death is instead in the arms of Akihiko, his lifelong mate, which is beautiful to see, but in doing so, it overwrites what the original had in store for him. I think it overwrites the representation that him walking off might have shown how he felt he was above it all, or that he could shoulder the burden alone, or maybe he just felt like he wasn't worth it. After all,
this is how it should be.
Before I get into the changes in battle itself, I'd like to say that I don't think all of the changes present throughout this game are outright negatives to the experience overall. The cutscenes, the monad doors, and the stylistic changes are ones that I think are, although there are a number of changes that I think are positive too. Theurgian characteristics are flat out broken, there is no denying that. Though, I'm hesitant to say that they are an outright negative. For base game Reload, they are stupidly broken, and more often than not, made bosses feel like a cakewalk. Ken's Theurgy, while incredibly strong, was painfully underutilized throughout my first playthrough, because I was never in a position bad enough to need to use it. However, contrasting that experience, I think it's actually an incredibly enjoyable mechanic that made the answer far more engaging than I think it would have if I was playing Fez. Not all of them are terminally giga-busted, but they are universally pretty strong abilities that can be built to break the game in half, further changing the original experience of Persona 3 to something entirely new. But kind of in a positive way, I think. Persona 3 Fez is dog shit. I made a review about Resident Evil 3 late last year. The point of that video was that While you can play RE3 the entire way through and have an enjoyable experience, it is not representative in any way of the game that came before it, therefore nullifying its entire existence. Persona 3 Reload shares similarities to RE3 in that same way, but I believe they are nowhere near as egregious as they were for RE3. Persona as a franchise has many different ways to experience the same thing. Persona 3, 4, and 5 all have a manga, an anime, and multiple games for each entry in the series. Remake, remaster, or port, the choice to experience the series is in your hands. Is it fair to say that you haven't experienced Persona 3 if you've read the manga, for example? Persona 3 was built first and foremost as a game for the PS2, and its story was about the experience you had while going through it. I don't think there's any way of getting around that. It's designed to be a tough game to play. You can't control your teammates, it's possible to reverse social links, and you can get sick if you stay too long in Tartarus. It's a tough journey, representative of life itself. That's part of the philosophy of Persona 3's story, that the suffering gave meaning to its ending. That's what you were fighting for, what kept you playing. In that sense, the gameplay informs the story. That's not present in the manga, that's suffering. It's almost impossible to translate into a manga, but that was what Persona 3 was about. So how much can you change the overall experience of Persona 3 and still justify that you've experienced it?
I guess get with the program.
The ship of Theseus is a philosophical question that asks very basically, what does it mean to replace something? If a ship, over time, eventually rots to the point where it's entirely replaced with new pieces, entirely unrelated to that ship, is it still the same ship? Persona 3 has had 4 different versions of the exact same game. Aside from the word of shit, there generally hasn't been any large change to the story, and yet, depending on the person you ask, they could write off all but one version, or give you a valid reason for all of them. To begin tackling the question, how do you experience Persona 3? You could try the very first entry, SMTP3. I'm pretty sure that most people would agree with me when I say that without the additions from FES, it probably isn't a holistic experience. SMTP3 doesn't contain the answer, doesn't have a social link for Igus, and it doesn't have a hard mode, just to name 3. So it must be P3 FES, right? No. Personally, I don't think it can be. Direct control is enough of a con for people that they will completely dismiss FES for other versions. I think that's enough of a reason to justify it not being the definitive edition. It does have an interesting gameplay reason for it, but it is such a universally frustrating feature that it essentially bars people from playing the game in its entirety. And because of that, it's been removed in every subsequent Persona game. I think at the very least, you should have the option to turn it off or on. Just to really hammer the point home, female social links will get jealous when you level them at the same time. That's because every single one auto-romances without exception, leading to other characters getting jealous and reversing their social link, making it impossible without doing them one at a time. Another mechanic removed from later games that was generally a positive change. P3P is visually an entirely new game that does well to add about as much as it can from FES, as well as the FemC route, which is something exclusive to it. It's basically the entire reason anyone goes back to P3P, but it doesn't have the answer. And now Reload, which I've already gone through. So, what is the definitive version of Persona 3? I don't think there is one. And that is the core problem with Persona 3 Reload's release. It isn't definitive enough for the previous fans in the series to consider making a return to it. The constant bitching about FemC not being in the game is kind of obnoxious at this point, but her exclusion means that Reload by default cannot be a definitive version of Persona 3. Furthermore, the overriding of that same content that is present is just another reason in a long list to consider it not as a definitive edition, but another option amongst many. However, what it is modern enough and enjoyable enough for new players to sink their teeth into. SMTP3, FES, and Portable are all very old and sometimes clunky titles that bar people from playing them. That's what Reload has over all 3 of these other titles. Each and every version of this game has its upsides and downsides. So, how can you possibly experience P3 if none of these are the original ship? I believe that anything, including the manga, anime, and whatever the fuck, can be an experience of Persona 3, as long as it adheres to the original story of Persona 3. You may not have experienced the female route if you haven't played through it, and you probably haven't experienced Persona 3 FES if you played through Reload, but in essence, you have played through Persona 3, and that is all each entry in the series needs to be. A gateway to the core of the game, which would be the story it shares between every single version of the game. So now we enter the part of this video where we discuss the idea of this game being obsolete, or writing it off because of flaws, however small they may be to the core experience. I don't really think it matters that someone disagrees with me on any particular topic. If you think that Persona 3 FES is the definitive edition of Persona 3, I can't really begrudge you that position. And it's not really interesting for me to fight with individual people about that opinion. Ultimately, you can go and play whatever you like, when you like, and have an enjoyable experience regardless of what I think. Although I do think it's important to push back against criticism that I feel is unfair to the overall quality of any given game, as that criticism impacts hundreds of thousands of people's perception on that specific topic. It's said that Alien Isolation never got a sequel because of this very review. Is that possible? I don't really think he was the entire reason, but it's undeniable, as someone writing for one of the biggest gaming journalism outlets even today, that he had an impact. I think Persona 3 cops a load of shit, sometimes for reasons I would deem to be unfair. It is a flawed game. There is nothing wrong with criticizing Reload for its decisions in design, gameplay, or story. In fact, I think that the backlash can be understandable. I've never had to experience one of my favourite games getting remastered and ruined, in a sense. So, it's possible there's something about this remake that I just don't understand. Maybe as someone who couldn't even get through the first block of FES, I don't have a place to comment on the criticisms of this game. I think that could be possible, but while I can understand the point of view these people are coming from, the facts are that this game is not nearly as bad as the people who criticize it claim it to be. It's not only horribly annoying, it's also a disservice and an over-exaggeration to the quality of this game. Persona fans themselves, I feel, are horribly obnoxious and elitist when it comes to discussing the validity of any given game in the series. If this is how we feel about P3R, then what are the reviews going to look like when the Persona 4 remake comes out? When Persona 4 Golden, the fuck being a PNG, Golden Reload, Trinity Soul comes out, I guarantee you it will be bitched about and complained about in the exact same way Reload was, assuming it isn't outrageously dogshit, obviously. Then I'm going to hear the same tired talking points that I didn't need to hear from Reload the first time. What's the point in asking for these remakes if people don't end up liking them anyway? What's happening is that the people asking for these remakes are not the same people who claim FES is the definitive edition of Persona 3. They're two different audiences. I think Persona 4 Golden is like the pinnacle of what you could possibly want from P4 on modern platforms. It keeps the 2000s aesthetic with the exact same story and the exact same gameplay. No theurgy or game-breaking characteristics included. After the remake releases, Golden is the definitive edition will be the next elitist argument I have to hear for the rest of time. I think that Persona 4 Golden is the definitive edition of Persona 4, but I don't think Persona 4 Golden is for the people who want a Persona 4 remake. With the eventual release of P4 Re whatever the fuck, I believe that there will be some addition that begins to paint divisions on what game is the definitive edition. But as someone who's played through Persona 4 Golden, the Persona 4 remake probably isn't for me. And while I may not enjoy it, I'm sure that someone else completely new to Persona will. To come back to Persona 3 Reload, overall, it is a version of Persona 3 that is aimed to be enjoyable for people who have never played P3 before. I think writing it off is a very short-sighted and dismissive view of a game that does provide value for a niche in the fanbase. I think that's enough to warrant its existence. But at the same time, I don't want to see another remake of this game ever in my life.